2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBEZ Daily chat group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome back to the VIBEZ Daily podcast, our year-long devoted series going through the entire Bible in a year. It is day 52, so we have continued to trek through scripture, and we are starting a new book today, the book of Deuteronomy. And with that, I am with some friends again, back with Shameeka, and we have a new friend with us. Nakia is joining us as we start the book of Deuteronomy today. And man, Nakia was excited to join us. You said this is one of your favorite books.
Yes, Deuteronomy is one of my favorites. I've never read it in its entirety, so I'm super excited to do that with VIBEZ Church and get to put the pieces together. But from what I've read, it's always been this beautiful depiction of me, of like we as believers, as our walk with Christ, right? After we've received the gift of salvation, we've gone through the wilderness, right? We've gone through all of these trials and tribulations, complaining, and it's like, all right, we're about to go into the promised land. And here we are as believers, we're waiting for Jesus to come back for his church, and we get to inherit an eternity in heaven on the streets of gold. And so for me, in this period of waiting, the book of Deuteronomy has always been a reminder, because that's what we're about to see here it's a call, it's a charge for us to just remember what God has brought us out of and where we're going. It's just a book of hope. I love it. I'm excited to join y'all. This is the perfect time.
Come on. I think that's the best way I've ever heard someone describe Deuteronomy.
That's good.
That's really good.
Yeah, because it is. I mean, it is anticipation, right? Like we'll see here when we start chapter 1, it really just tells us it's the 40th year, right? Like it's the 40 years have passed. It is that time to head in. And then, as you said, it's kind of a repeat. I mean, the word Deuteronomy itself comes from, the idea of like second law, like to kind of repeat the law, what we've already kind of gone from before. So not, again, like a new law, but more so just to repeat it again. And so, that is a great correlation for us in this time of waiting for the return of Jesus. So that's good. That's a great place to start. Start chapter 1 here. We have 4 chapters to cover today specifically. And as we just kind of alluded to, it is the 40th year in the 11th month, right? Or the 11th day in the 11th month that Jesus have this, all right, we're getting ready to go into the promised land. These are all the things you need to know or be reminded of. So that just kind of sets the stage. But Moses starts to just kind of go back through kind of where they've gone and some of, who they've established. Anything that just jumped out to you guys in this first chapter as Moses sets the stage for them to get ready to go into the promised land?
Well, I was just going to mention that just in the reading in total, I do appreciate this narrative of a story of the history of what they've gone through from Moses, because I feel like this was the first time I saw like the repetition of things or like us being reminded of it, but it almost felt more like I just was thinking about Paul. Like it just felt like this moment of like, let me gather my church together and let me like encourage them and like just remind them of what's to come, and also remind them of the history of what we've gone through, and as a result of our sin, like the things that has happened. And I think for me, I looked at it from the lens of this is the new generation. Like the new generation of the Israelites, like the old is gone. Their fathers and fathers have passed off, and now we have this new generation. I just feel like Moses' language, in the way that I'm reading it and seeing it, is that it seems like he's almost speaking to the level of that generation. Because before, I felt like when we see him, oftentimes repeat things. He's repeating things that the Lord straight told him. And it's kind of more like, okay, don't do this, don't do that. Like, but again, I just felt like it just kind of meshed it and brought it all together. And now he's like, this is what the Lord has commanded, and this is what he said, and these are how we're going to keep his decree. But there was a lot of like nuggets of encouragement in it that I was seeing in his language. And so I just wanted to point that out just as a whole. I really loved it and have been enjoying reading it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I think to your point, you could just tell even in the difference in like the pronouns and the tenses that's used, right? That like it almost feels like this is like Moses's like I don't want to say like autobiography, but like almost like these are my this is my story from my perspective, right? Of kind of what took place. And that's important because we already know from the previous books that Moses doesn't get to enter the promised land.
Yeah.
Right? And, spoiler alert, but he dies at the end of Deuteronomy. And so he's very much aware that like, this is my last chance to say anything to you all. Right? Yeah. And to give you these words. And so it almost just feels like a deathbed, just autobiography of like, look, if you guys don't remember anything, like, remember this, and if my life was worth anything, if I serve the Lord well, like, I at least want you guys to take this away. And so, that's just kind of the context to me.
And to your point of that autobiography, it was very much given like, this is my grandfather. Like, I'm sitting at the feet of my grandfather. He's telling me this story. But I also am a part of this story. And like, there's things that I get to inherit in ways that I need to act to continue on this legacy with our family. So
And to both of you guys' point, it's like it's the command that stood out to me. It's like, okay, when we were at Mount Sinai, the Lord our God said to us, "You have stayed at this mountain long enough." And I feel like, again, it just points back to where we are in our daily lives, right? It's just a charge. It's like, all right, you've been at this mountain long enough. Let's charge forward. Let's move forward. Like this is where we're going. After where we've been. So
I know we really want to get to some of these specifics, but I think this big picture kind of setting it is really good to me right now. The way that you guys are describing it, because like even as you just mentioned, it's almost like Moses even trying to remind the people, like, this was never meant to be your destination. Like, and, there was always something coming. There was always this promised land before you. And so, like, let me just remind you of your journey and remind you that, again, this wasn't meant to be the end. And I think, like, that is so good for us. Because I think we get so caught up in this world, right? And in this life. And I think it is important for us to just know, like, this is not the end. Like, this was never meant to be the end. And like, and so just know the significance of the life we live now, although valuable and beneficial and advancing the kingdom in so many ways, it's still not the end of the story, and it was never meant to be.
Very good.
And that was especially significant for them to know, because the generations before them, oftentimes, like, they wanted Egypt to be the end, in a sense of, like, they asked to go back there. They wanted to be back in their bondage and their slavery. And so it is a way to make sure they don't try to settle again.
Yep.
Good. So as we kind of move through chapter 1, he talks about kind of, again, leaving from Horeb specifically, and kind of, where they were to pick up their journey. He kind of talks about the different leaders that he assigned, right? He's just going back through, like, these are the things that I did, right? Like, I told you at this time, I can't bear this responsibility. So, I brought on some others to help. I took leaders from each of you, wise and respected men, right? Again, he's kind of just recalling his life here. He reminds them of the mistakes they make, right? Kind of here, starting at verse 19 or so. And remind them of their mistakes and some things of that nature. Anything in this that, like, as you're reading it, maybe in Deuteronomy, that you just kind of were like, oh, I forgot that happened, or oh, that was interesting, a different perspective on that. Anything that was interesting to you guys about the way he told some of these stories here in chapter 1 and chapter 2?
I did notice in this text him kind of pointing out Esau's land. I think it was in verse 5, but he talks about how or even chapter 2, and it starts in verse 4. He was like, give the people these orders: you're about to pass through the territory of your relatives, the descendants of Esau, who live in Seir, and they will be afraid of you. But be very careful. Do not provoke them to war, for I will not give you any of their land, not even enough to put your foot on. I have given Esau the hill country of Seir as his own, and you are to pay them in silver for which you eat and the water you drink. And I do remember, if I'm not mistaken, in the journey, in the process, like, they did come across like Esau.
Yeah, they tried to pass through his city.
Yeah, but I thought he didn't allow them, right?
Correct.
Like, he didn't allow them at the time, but I thought it was interesting to see like this come up, because I don't know, it just kind of, for Esau to come up anyway, like, we know that that's Israel's brother.
Yeah.
And like, this is their relatives, and everything, but also seeing how God's hand was on them, and was like, yeah, you're not about to conquer their land and their territory. Like, we're not about to mess with them. And if, you are to, like, pay your dues too, like pay whatever it is that you may use or eat or drink. I thought it was interesting to kind of see that being pointed out in their journey.
Yeah, like, it seems like there's this common theme in these first couple chapters of, like, these are the people that you ran across, right? Like, even when, they sent the spies in chapter 1, they reminded them about sending the spies into, or the scouts, I should say, into Canaan. And, you guys got scared, and, that's why what happened before. But then, like, you came across Edom, you come across Moab, you come across the Amorites, like, and this is how I dealt with those situations. And I think it's interesting to see that, because it's like, as you said, with Esau, God was like, no, like, you don't get their land. Like, you don't get that. You can't possess that. But when it came to, like, the Amorites and whatnot, it was like, no, like, I conquered them for you on your behalf, right? And gave you that. And it just seemed to be this distinction on, like, who God has essentially permitted them, what lands he's permitted for them is for them, and nothing more and nothing less, right? Like, he is like, I set aside the Amorites and the Moabites and the Canaanites, and I set aside that land for you. That's yours. Don't try to take anything more than that. Like, it's not yours, right? And I'm going to give you all of that because I said I would, right? So what's for you is for you, nothing more, nothing less. And I thought that, like, it was interesting just watching him go through these journeys of, like, so we bypassed our brothers. It's verse 8 of chapter 2, right? And Esau, we bypassed them, but then we come across, the Moabites, right? And then we scroll down and we go across the Ammonites, and then we keep going a little bit. I'm saying scroll down, it's my Bible. But, like, we keep going, right? I'm like, scroll. I just do this as I read my paper Bible. But and then we get to the Amorites too. So, like, I thought it was interesting just that the difference between when he encountered these different people, how God treated them.
And if you continue to scroll down, as you said, even talking about the land that God gave to Lot, to the descendants of Lot, I'm like, hold up, like, we're talking about Lot here on the scene, which we know that he was a part of, like Abraham's cousin, right? That he was always trying to look out for and making sure, like, he was good, even though he should have been left behind or whatever the case may be. But also just that pointing out that, like, God still honored that, and still allowed for Lot's descendants to have a piece of land. And I feel like that's still upholding, like, this promise or covenant to Abraham. So that stuck out to me for sure.
Okay. Like I said, we can kind of continue through chapter 2 here a little bit. Again, God reminds them how, he defeated certain lands and kind of what he told them to do in these different places and spaces. He goes on to chapter 3 and kind of does the same thing, right? At the beginning of chapter 3, kind of deals with King Og and how, they defeated them. Why do you think God, like, in your opinion, why do you think God kept reminding them of the different people and different kings and lands that they conquered? Like, why do you think that was important for him to say for this generation specifically?
Well, one, I was going to say that one thing I noticed in the language was that God was given the glory for doing these things. That it was like you came across these people that seemingly were, like, just could have defeated you and, like, all those different things, yet the Lord our God gave them over to us. Like, you kind of see this language, but I wonder if it was to really kind of just like encourage them, because I'm surely like they'll probably encounter different situations in the future where people may come and try to attack them, or wars may go down or whatever. But I do believe that once God brings them into the promised land, he's not just going to like leave them. Like, he's like, no, I'm still with you though. And so whenever these things do come about, like, fear not, for I'm the Lord. And just like we've done it before, and you see me do it before, like, it'll be done again. So maybe that could be a reason why we're getting this history and reminder of all these different people. And these were well-known people. Like, well-known clans, like, they had a lot of history. They had a lot of people. They had a lot of like things that seemingly you probably could be fearful of. But also it was wicked nations too that really served other gods and defiled their lands and did what they wanted to do. And God's like, I wiped them out. So don't get comfortable. And and again, keep my law, because I really mean what I say, and it's that serious to the point of wiping out nations.
I mean, I think some of it also goes back to me, and I think, Shameeka, you're the one that kind of brought this up, but just also that, like, at this point, we're dealing with a generation of people that weren't exactly old enough to kind of know what God was doing when a lot of this happened, right? Like, if we're thinking about they were 20 and under when they crossed the Red Sea, right? Or under 20 at that point, right? And so, like, we're dealing with some individuals, and this is 40 years later, so some people probably been born into this that are over 20 now that, like, were born in the wilderness, right? And so, like, some of this, I think, is also just, the point is, you know, let me just tell this generation what God did for you, so you kind of know how you got here. So you also just kind of know what you're up, like even know that it was done. Like, one of the verses that stuck out to me was in chapter 2, verse 34, where it says, at that time we captured all his cities and completely destroyed the people of every city, including the women and children. We left no survivors. Like, as much as I can imagine the people kind of feeling like, all right, somebody is going to be out to get us, right? Or someone is kind of always going to, you know, be coming back for us. And I feel like it was important for God to just establish, like, no, I cleared the way, and I cleared the way completely. Like, I have given you this land and given you honor. And as you said, the glory goes to God. So it should help this next generation know it's not even about our own might, right? It's not about our own ability. Like, God did these things for us before. So we just kind of know who it is that we serve. And, you know, even big picture, as we remember when we started Exodus, like, a lot of the big purpose of, like, even the Levitical laws and that stuff was to try to teach this people of Israel, who for the most part had pagan practices and, like, had been in Egypt for so long, that, like, the best way to keep that devotion to God is to pass that on to that next generation and remind them, right, as well. So I think I just kind of saw some of that in there too.
And that's why I can appreciate, as much as it is seemingly like repetition to us, how detailed, like, Moses continued to be, because every detail does matter. And it did leave that room for just mistake or error like, it didn't leave any room for you to just kind of assume that, oh, when I saw this is what was happening. Like, no, like, let me lay it out plain and clear.
And because these are children, and they've made mistakes previously, it made me, to answer your question, Eric, it made me wonder if he was maybe setting the tone so that they wouldn't go astray. It's like, okay, when you go through the Moabites, it says here in what is this, verse 7 in chapter 2, he has watched over you every step through the great wilderness. During these 40 years, the Lord your God has been with you, and you've lacked nothing. So when you go through through the or past the Moabites, don't take their plunder, don't take anything from them, because just a reminder, you have everything you need. I've seen you through the wilderness. I've taken care of you. You've lacked nothing. So don't go astray. Don't go in there thinking that you have to, like, go to war, to get through. Just do what I said. Stay on course.
Yeah, good. Okay. Well, he continues his reminders in chapter 3. He reminds them of how the Reubenites and the Gadites will kind of have their land, and the Manasseh, I think, tribe of Manasseh as well, will kind of have their land prior to the Jordan. They are still required to go and fight first before going back and taking that land, right, to take possession. And then reminds them of the fact that Joshua is essentially in charge, right? Kind of going forward. But anything in the second half of chapter 3 that you guys thought was interesting as you kind of reviewed it and read through it?
Well, I was going to say it was actually in verse 5. I highlighted how it talked about like the cities being fortified with high walls and with gates and bars, and there was also a great many unwalled villages. We completely destroyed them. That stuck out to me because, again, you think that you would be intimidated by seeing a city that's so fortified and locked down. Like, if I was a city, I'm like, oh no, they got their stuff together. They probably got a whole army. Like, you know, like they have it, you know. There's intimidation that can come with it. And I just love, again, seeing that even what is considered a giant to some and like considered a threat to some, but yet they completely destroyed it.
Yeah, certainly.
that really stuck out to me.
Yeah.
I just, I can't get over the fact that Moses still didn't get in. Like, I know it's a part of the story, but I'm still like, man, he did so much. And to me, like, what stuck out at the second half of chapter 3 was just his grief. Because he was like, and I remember reading, I'm thinking like, oh man, he begging, he's still not gonna get in. You know what I mean? Yeah. So he says, where is it? Oh yeah, in verse 25, he says, "Please let me cross the Jordan to see the wonderful land on the other side, the beautiful hill country in the Lebanon mountains." And it said, but the Lord was angry, so he's like, "Nah." So it's I'm still trying to fathom how you could be so obedient. And it's like he you know, what did he do? He struck the rock and instead of you know, and I'm like, but he did so much more. Like he did everything else. He labored in prayer for these people. He said everything that the Lord told him to say, and the Lord was still so angry that he was certain you would not see it. And I'm like, so I'm stuck on that, y'all. I'm like,
real.
No, for real.
That's very real.
It is, because like I actually appreciated seeing this, because I remember when it first happened. Like, we don't really get to hear or see a lot of, like, Moses being like, okay, but, like, are you serious, God? Like, this was the first time I felt like we saw, like, his heart really desired to go into the land. And so it was pretty sad to see it. And, like, guys, like, all right, enough of this. Like, don't speak to me about it anymore.
Right, which says he's been asking him multiple times.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah, that goes to show, like, he been praying about this for a minute.
He's been
like, but with that, like, man, like, the fact that Moses still carried out his call.
That part. Because I'm like, if I can't enter the promised land, like, y'all on your own.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not getting it anyway, so I guess they can just figure it out.
Correct.
But that man stayed. He was obedient to the point of death. Like, literally.
Knowing that he wouldn't necessarily get to see the fruit of his labor.
Now that was admirable. Yeah. Like, just reading on, I was like, wow, like, he's still like encouraged to go back and still be obedient. Yeah. Even knowing I'm not gonna see.
Yeah. And I had noticed that, because I think this was it this week where God told Moses to go up and like look at the land from the mountain, or like from some kind of place.
Yeah, it was.
He had him look at it. And even in that moment I was kind of thinking, I was like, that would be a tease though. It's like, it's kind of like probably what he needed to keep moving forward, to be like, okay, there's a promise, it's a beautiful land, but also it's like, that probably was one of those moments he was like, all right, God, I'm seeing this. Can I go though? Can I go?
The Lord was like, no.
Yeah. Dang. Oh gosh, that's so good. You guys brought out so much, because like, you know, well, no, because I think, like, again, my prayer and goal always as we read these passages is that we like reflect on what does this mean for me? Like, how does this apply to me? Because again, I can grieve for Moses, and that feels unfair, right? After kind of all that he's done, but there's so many things it teaches me personally. Like, when it teaches me about God and His Word, right? Like that He stands by it, right? And when He says it, He means it. And I think, like, as much as Moses begged, God had already declared what was going to take place, right? And so, like, I think that, again, that may stink, like, you know, personally, like from our perspective, but I think it speaks to God's, like, just who He is, like His faithfulness, His dependability, His honesty, His justice. Because, I mean, let's just call it what it is, right? If we did serve a God who could just be swayed because we begged Him, like, I mean, that's our God we can really depend on that much, right? You know, and we can't really depend on Him to just follow through. But, like, that is one of the things that we can count on of God, is that when He says it, He means it. Whether it's a promise or it's a curse. Like, we know one way or the other, like, He's going to stand by His word. And so, like, I take that because I think maybe it challenges me to like take the Lord's no's, right? Like, when He shuts that door, stop knocking.
Jesus.
Like,
hold up now,
just stop knocking. Like, Jesus. Like, that's that. And I mean, this is like what I'm taking away. I'm like, God, like, how many times have I just banged on the door and just been like, God, please, please. And He's just like, I already said no, that's not for you. That's not yours. Right. And so, like, I don't know. I take that away and I get that as like, geez, as tough as this is, like, Lord, let me just also learn from Moses. In this, and just understand that myself. Yeah.
Even if it's no, still be obedient, still do what He said. That's the charge. Like, that is the example we should follow here, which is beautiful. You know, I'm in my, you know, humanity and flesh, I'm like, oh man, like, please, can He go? But beyond that, He was obedient even after the no. And that is something I struggle with personally. It's like, like you said, you know, you want to beat on the door.
And that's, because that was the other thing you guys said. And I forgot about it. That was the other thing you guys said. That yes, like, are we willing to do that? Are we willing to do, it's two things. One, obviously obey God no matter what, right? Because there's that. And I think it's important, because as we go into chapter 4, when He calls, like, the people of Israel to obedience, like, Moses can do it from a position of, like, I led by example. I obeyed even when I knew like this wasn't going to benefit me. Like, I did it. And so, like, I'm not telling you from a place of like, do what I say, not what I did. Like, I'm doing it from a like, I'm telling you one-on-one, I actually did it. And two, when I did it, there were consequences, and I'm also evidence of that, right? So, like, it's important that He says that. But I think the takeaway is that, like, are we willing not just to obey God, but to do, like, literally selflessly do for others, even when we know there's no benefit for us.
For sure.
When there's just nothing we're going to get out of it. Because ultimately, He doesn't get to receive the reward, right? He doesn't get to receive the promise. And so, like, even though He knows that's the case, there's nothing in it for Him. He sticks it through. And I'm like I said, for me, I'm like, dang, am I willing to stick it out? Or am I willing to quit? Like, as soon as they're like, oh, word, there's nothing in it for me. Cool. Y'all got it. Like, am I that person to just say, nah, now if I'm gonna get something out of it, then cool, I'm willing to put the work in. You know, but even knowing that I may not get any glory or get any promise or get any reward, am I still willing to follow through and do for others in that? So man, you guys are
those are those moments and those situations where you're able to see what's really hitting in your heart. If I'm doing something out of selfish gain,
come on, man,
like, I'm already doing it wrong. Like,
that's already not it. And just from a practical standpoint, what came up for me when you asked that, like, are we willing, is like, as a single person, my I guess promise or thing that I want so badly is to be married. And so what I've wrestled with is, Lord, am I still willing to honor you with my purity and my body? Am I going to become embittered if this doesn't happen? And so I've that's what I faced, and like Like, can I push forward and still raise my daughter to love the Lord and honor him and follow his precepts, even if I don't get what I view as a reward in marriage? It's like, well, do you just love me? Like, just by yourself, will you still be obedient? Will you still do things that because I've given you the charge. You still need to do ministry.
So good.
Yeah, you still need to lead your child that I gave you. Like, you can't tap out because you didn't get this thing. And you know, by the grace of God, I've been able to, you know, press forward and even have said, like, in a dating relationship, hey, if this we don't have to, I don't have to have a relationship at this point. You know what I mean? Like, I just want to, like, honor the Lord. And if the promise, I said these very words, I said, if the promise comes through Cain, it's still a win. So I don't have to have it. Like, I don't have to have, like, the husband and do all of this. Cause I'm like, it could very well come through Cain, and all praises be to Jesus. Cain is my daughter. So yeah, that's just what came up for me when you said that. I'm like, thank you, Jesus.
That's so good.
That's so good.
Like I said, that's literally what we see play out here. Right? Like,
yep.
And like so that puts you in a position that even as you raise your daughter and you raise her to those same standards, that like this is what Moses is doing. He's passing on to Joshua and the next people. I'm passing on the same standard to you, that like I can do that again from a position of I also struggle in the same way. Like, I pressed through the same challenges you had. I've been through the same wilderness that you've been through. I've done that, and I remained faithful and obedient. Even if, quote unquote, I may not get, and again, I mean, you don't have a declaration from the Lord, you're not going to get it. But like in his case, he knew he wasn't going to get it. But like, even knowing that, or even knowing that's a possibility, I can stand on that when I pass this on. And that's such a great example. Thanks for modernizing that for us, bringing that forward, because I think that's helpful. But yeah, I mean, let's end here on chapter 4, right? Because that's kind of, again, that's what Moses does here. Is he just kind of reminds them of his commands and calls them to obey kind of what God has told them to do, and even reminds them some of the consequences of that. Anything that just jumped out to you guys here in chapter 4 before we kind of bring today to a conclusion?
Yeah, I do love how Moses mentioned, like, for them not to add or subtract anything from the commands. Like, he's like, okay, this is already a blueprint that was given. You don't get to recreate, redefine, reculture, like, what the Lord has already said, which was a little bit, in some ways, I was like, because we've seen up until then, like, plenty of times where God has spoken to Moses and like added on either new laws, or like certain stuff came up where it's like, okay, now we got to address this. Or even with the situation with the daughters, where it's like, okay, now we need to make sure that these types of family can inherit land. Like, he's like, nope, don't add or subtract. And I think that was very like that was something that definitely needed to be said, because oftentimes we would try to justify ways to like add on to what the Lord had already said. So I really did enjoy seeing that.
Oh, that's good. That's really good, Shameeka. I think something else that, like, as you kind of moved past that stuck out to me was, you know, one of the things that I felt like in Leviticus and in particularly the second half of Exodus, when we get those laws, you know, one of the things we kind of talked about was repetitive was love the Lord your God, right? No other gods. Right, Sabbath, and those are like those two that kind of showed up. But I think we see that again, where, you know, they're trying to remind. It seems like Moses is trying to remind people of Israel, like, God is the only God, like He is the one true God. Like, you're gonna come across some other ones. You're gonna, like, there's gonna be some other people that you'll meet, but like, let's just focus on this God that we serve really quick. And kind of this second half of kind of chapter 4 here, starting in like verse 15, and he just really kind of instructs them, even like just passing this on to these generations. Verse 25, and it says, when you have children and grandchildren and have been in the land a long time, and if you act corruptly, making idol, like, they got to keep that standard too, right? Like, these children, grandchildren need to also know that this is the only God. And so it's up to you to kind of do that, and we'll get to that in a later chapter and kind of some instructions on how to do that. But like, that there was just this don't forget that there is only one God.
Yeah.
And it's up to you, not just you, but even your children and grandchildren to carry that.
Yeah. I also love in verse 6 how he talked about, like, as a result of them observing the laws, that other nations will look at them as being wise and understanding. Like, I was like, that's nothing that I didn't even think of, but I think it is cool, like, because who can, like, you have, again, we talk about the Israelites being a population as big as, like, LA. And to know that, like, if they are keeping up with and submitting to these commands, like, they're looked at as, like, oh, these are some wise people.
Yeah.
Like,
that's encouraging.
Yeah, that is encouraging. And too, like, a lot of times we're drawn or attracted to things like that. Like, those are the types of people that we often like to be under, because it's like, you know, let me get around someone who is older than me, that's been through something, or that's more seasoned, because then I can, like,
glean,
you know,
glean
glean from it. And so I can also see that being a way in which more people can serve and follow God. Is through that act of obedience and the wisdom. And we already see that they pretty much have it down packed on reciting and rehearsing, and even just reminding, like, this is the type of God that we serve, and this is why we serve him, and this is what he has done for us. And like that invitation to, like, join in on, like, you know, worshiping a God who is like no other. So yeah.
And I know the word doesn't come up in this particular section, but I think that goes back to the purpose and desire for holiness for the people of Israel, right? Because again, that word holy is really, you know, essentially defined as just set apart, as just different. And like you said, it's the same expectation of us. Like, that should also play out as believers now, that like there ought to be something different where people are kind of coming to look to us and go, like, okay, help me understand why you have a different favor on your life, right? Or help me understand why, again, you tend to love differently or forgive differently, right? Or grieve differently than others do. Like, there's something different. You have a different peace about you, right? Like, you just seem to be, and not that everything is okay all the time, but there just seems to be a peace or a joy every time I'm around you. That's just very, like, it doesn't seem to add up based off of what you told me is happening in your life. You know what I'm saying? Like, you know, and so, like, it should feel like, the world should be looking at us like, okay, those Christians are different. Like, what is it about them? And that's what happened when you live, you know, again, set apart and obey the decrees of the Lord. So
Yes.
yeah,
I love that.
Anything else in chapter 4 that stuck out to you guys before we wrap today?
Let's see. I do love them pointing out this idolatry piece of not worshiping, like, the sun, the moon, the stars.
None of that.
And again, it kind of just, no pun intended, I was going to say, it honestly shows that there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
Where even in today's world, we're seeing, like, people worshiping astrology and all these different things. And so I'm like, dang.
Building their own altars. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting that it says too, so do not corrupt yourselves by making an idol of any, because it's like pure corruption for you to think that you can build, you know, a golden calf or any type of altar and or believe in, you know, the sky or the birds or whatever it is. that you're corrupting yourselves and your own soul by doing that. So let's not do that. We're not. This is a warning against any type of idolatry.
Yeah.
That's a good call out, because I think we often feel like our sin like affects God, and it's like it doesn't really. Like, he's still gonna be holy and righteous, and he's still gonna be power and you know, powerful and mighty and awesome, and like you said, pure. He's gonna be all those things no matter what we do.
Yes.
He's like really your sin affects you, right? Like, it corrupts us, right?
Yourself.
Yeah.
And so that's a good call. That's good.
Yeah. Also, I start to see Moses' language shift a little bit, where he talks about, like, if you then become corrupt by worshiping these different idols and all that stuff. And he basically told them, like, one, there's going to be consequences, like, your land is going to quickly perish, like, you'll be destroyed. But then he also gives them this, caveat of, like, but there, like, if you seek the Lord, like your God, with everything in you, you'll find him. If you seek him with your whole heart and soul, and like this kind of like redemption that can take place where you can come back into communion and covenant with the Lord, because he'll be more merciful to them. I thought that was interesting. One, it's encouraging, right? Because we know that even in our own sin and our own flaws, like, it's easy to fall. Like it really is easy to fall. And it is an encouragement as a believer to know that, like, I still have an opportunity to turn to the Lord. Like, even if it's at the last second, like, I still can turn to the Lord. And I'll be able to find him. But what I thought was interesting about it is, like, it was as if Moses already knew that they were going to not obey the command. That there was going to be idolatry that would happen. And I wondered if it was because of just the history of what he's seen with them time after time again, and knowing that the Lord even said they're stiff-necked people. So part of me was like, dang, Moses, like, kind of watch your mouth, like, don't speak that into existence. But also I think it just was the realness of, like, actually this probably will happen. And so let me also leave you with, if it does happen, what you should do.
And also, like, don't let, like he said, like Moses says in verse 21, and again, I'm like, oh Lord, I just feel his grief. But he's like, don't let my death, be in vain. This is a warning against idolatry. He said, but the Lord was angry with me because of you. He vowed that I would not cross the Jordan River into the good land the Lord your God is giving you as your special possession. You will cross the Jordan to occupy the land, but I will not. Like he said, like, I'm gonna die. I'm not gonna get to see what you see. So this is a warning. Like, don't, you know what I mean? Like, I'm dying because of you. Like, don't let that be in vain. Just don't be building these false gods and stuff. Don't be doing that.
Because I'm sick of it.
I'm sick of it. I'm about to die.
That's good. And I know, like, everyone's kind of faith journey is a little different, but I think for those of us that do have, like, parents and grandparents that have been in the faith, I think that is, like, a challenge for us, right? Like, it's an encouragement. Like, all right, people have made sacrifices. They've been praying for you. They've been doing this kind of for generations. Like, don't let them down. Like, don't squander. As you said, that's a better word. Like, all of what they've invested in it. And then for those of us that are now creating that for generations, like, that's going to be our prayer as well. Right? Is that the generations behind us don't waste all we've invested in that. So that's good.
I just, and just before we close, I do want to say that, like, I do appreciate Moses still showing them the character of God. Again, this is where I feel like his language and the way that he was speaking to them was just so different than what I had saw before, because he's like, no, like, this is a merciful God. Like, he's a jealous God. Like, he has a consuming fire, like, but he's also merciful. And, like, just that reassurance of, like, he really loves y'all and care for you guys. Like, so there's still mercy that is there.
I forgot he said that, and that was shocking to me, because I was like, oh my, he still sees him as merciful. Even though he's going to die. Like, even though he's not even going to get to see what they're about to see, but he's still, not only is he obedient after he finds out he's not going to get to see it, but he's still, like, encouraging the people and saying, hey, but God is still merciful. He still loves you. Because that's hard. That would be hard for me to even see after I got that news, but man, Moses is, he different.
He a real one.
He different.
Start to see more and more why God chose him.
Certainly.
That's real.
His heart was pure.
Good. Well, he has more for us, and we'll kind of pick up tomorrow in chapter 5 and hear more from Moses and his, I'm just going to call this his manifesto here in Deuteronomy. Right? He leads this for us, but we'll pick up tomorrow with chapter 5 and kind of continue there. But again, thank you guys for joining us. Pray that, again, this is helpful. This is a helpful resource to you as you read along with us and kind of go through the scriptures. But until tomorrow, take care. God bless.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue our journey through the Bible. Take good care.